The young cop leaned against his cruiser with a smirk, watching the air hiss out of the stranger's tire. "Teach him a lesson," he muttered, not knowing the man he had just messed with had once led missions so dangerous even the Pentagon whispered his name. But to this cop he was just another old black man in a beat-up car, and that would be his first mistake. It was just past 7 a.m. when the black sedan rolled into Willow Creek, a quiet southern town where everyone knew everyone and everyone noticed strangers. Samuel Collins eased his car into a space outside, a faded old diner, its chipped sign reading Maggie's Home Cooking. The car was nothing special. Scratched paint, dusty rims, and a small American flag decal peeling off the back window. Samuel stepped out slowly, stretching his shoulders, and breathing in the warm, heavy air of summer. He was a tall black man in his mid-60s, wearing jeans, boots, and a faded army t-shirt that clung to his still solid frame. His skin was lined with age, but his eyes were too sharp for someone simply passing through. As he stepped into the diner for some breakfast, across the street, Officer Brent Malone sipped coffee in his patrol car. Malone was young, barely a year out of the academy and itching to prove something. He saw Samuel's out-of-state plates and the worn look of his car, and immediately pegged him as a drifter. "Probably sleeping in that thing," Malone muttered, his lip curling. Boredom mixed with a touch of cruelty and an overinflated sense of authority made him act on impulse. As the diner's screen door slapped shut behind Samuel, Malone quietly got out of his cruiser, glanced around, and crouched by the front passenger tire. With one quick jab of his pocket knife, he punctured the rubber. The hiss was sharp and satisfying. He grinned to himself and walked off like it was nothing. Inside the diner, Samuel sat at the counter, sipping hot coffee and eating scrambled eggs with slow, steady movements. He felt at ease in places like this, more quiet, tucked away, places where people didn't know who he was or what he had done. That peace shattered when he returned to his car and spotted the front tire sagging to the ground. He bent down and studied the clean slice, running one calloused finger along the edge. This wasn't a wear and tear blowout. It was deliberate. He could feel it in his bones. As he opened the trunk and pulled out a spare, Officer Malone strolled over, arms folded, a smirk dancing on his lips. "Having some car trouble, sir?" he asked, with a hint of mockery. Samuel stood up slowly, eyes locking onto the young man's face. He said nothing for a moment, just studied him the way he used to study insurgents through a scope. "Looks like someone got careless with a knife," he finally said. Malone shrugged. "Maybe, could be anyone." Samuel nodded, not looking away. "Yeah, anyone." Something in his calm voice made Malone uncomfortable. It wasn't anger, it was the stillness of it, the weight. Samuel turned back to the tire without another word. Malone walked off, his confidence already shaken by a man he still thought was just some old vet. He had no idea who he had just poked, no idea at all. The morning sun rose higher as Samuel knelt by the damaged tire, replacing it with practiced ease, each motion deliberate and calm. He didn't curse, didn't grumble, just worked in silence like a man used to much bigger problems. Inside, his mind ticked steadily. That cop hadn't just punctured a tire, he'd tested a man who'd once led teams into enemy territory with nothing but a compass, a silenced weapon, and nerves of steel. Samuel didn't need a badge to command respect. He carried it in his silence, in the way he moved, in the scars on his arms that told stories without words. When the spare was secured and the tools packed away, he shut the trunk gently and stood up, brushing his hands on his jeans. That's when Malone returned, still wearing the smug expression of someone who thought he'd pulled off something clever. "You sure you're all good now?" he asked, his tone casual but laced with condescension. Samuel turned to him slowly. "I said I was," he replied, voice flat. Malone shifted slightly. He had expected annoyance, maybe some raised voice or attitude, but instead, he got a steady, controlled calm that unsettled him. There was something in Samuel's eyes, something too still, too focused. "You got ID?" Malone asked suddenly, trying to reclaim control. "We've had a few incidents with out-of-towners lately." Samuel stared at him, then slowly reached into his back pocket, not with panic or irritation, but with the same composure a soldier might use defusing a bomb. He handed over his driver's license, nothing more. Malone looked it over, saw the name Samuel L. Collins. Nothing stood out to him, just an old vet, passing through. "Where you headed, Mr. Collins?" he asked. "East," Samuel said, still watching him. "Is that a problem?" Malone forced a laugh. "Nah, just keeping things safe around here. You know how it is." Samuel didn't respond. He just took his license back and slipped it into his wallet. Then he said something quiet, almost too quiet for Malone to catch. "Power makes boys feel like men. Real men don't need it." Malone frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked sharply. But Samuel had already turned toward the diner again. He walked slowly, purposefully, and left Malone standing there, frustrated and confused. Inside the diner, Maggie, the owner, had seen most of the interaction through the window. She brought Samuel another cup of coffee as he sat back down. "That cop gives everybody trouble," she said softly. "Thinking that badge makes him 10 feet tall." Samuel nodded once. "He'll learn. Sooner or later, they always do." Maggie looked at him more closely now. noticing the military posture, the old healed wound running along his forearm, the way he never sat with his back to the door. "You're not just some vet, are you?" she asked gently. Samuel looked up at her, a faint smile curling at the edge of his lips. "Depends who's asking," he said. And with that, he sipped his coffee. Calm as ever, while outside, the wheels of reckoning had already begun to turn. By noon the next day, Willow Creek was buzzing. It didn't take long for word to spread that Officer Malone had picked the wrong man to mess with. What began as whispers in the diner turned into murmurs at the gas station, the barbershop, and, eventually, the mayor's office. Everyone knew Samuel Collins wasn't just an old vet. His name, though barely recognized by most, triggered something in the mind of Mayor Jennings, a former Marine who still kept old contacts in the Department of Defense. A few quiet calls later, Jennings confirmed what no one in town could have guessed. Samuel "Ghost" Collins wasn't just any veteran. He was once one of the most lethal and respected Delta Force commanders the U.S. military had ever known. His name had passed between generals in hushed tones. He led operations that never made headlines, missions buried in black ink and redacted reports. He had saved hostages, neutralized threats, and ghosted out of war zones without leaving a trace. Now he was sitting in their diner sipping coffee and eating scrambled eggs. The mayor, stunned, called the sheriff, who almost dropped the phone. "You mean the Ghost Collins?" "As in that ghost?" Jennings replied. "The very one." Sheriff Darnell, a no-nonsense man in his 60s, immediately summoned Malone. When the young officer strutted into the office, still proud of his tire prank, the sheriff didn't say a word at first. He simply turned his laptop around, showing a photo of Samuel Collins in full tactical gear, a younger face but the same eyes. Malone's smirk faded. "Who is that?" he asked, voice unsure. "That," the sheriff said coldly, "is the man whose tire you stabbed. The man who's done more for this country than you ever will. The man who's probably taken down warlords while you were still in high school." Malone's face drained of color. "I didn't know he started." "No," the sheriff snapped, slamming a hand on the desk. "You didn't care. That's worse. You saw a black man in an old car and thought you could make him small. You have any idea how lucky you are that he didn't press charges? Hell, you're lucky he didn't put you on your back." Malone sat silently, the weight of his mistake finally pressing down. "What do I do?" he asked, voice low. The sheriff sighed, leaning back. "You own it. You apologize like a man, and then you start learning what real service looks like." Meanwhile, Samuel remained quiet in the town. He wasn't looking for revenge. He didn't need anyone to be punished. He'd seen real consequences, real justice, and real loss. He was beyond pride or ego, but he also wasn't going to pretend nothing happened. He knew the town was waking up, realizing the truth of who he was. That suited him fine. The past didn't define him, but it followed him, and now it was casting its long shadow across Willow Creek, forcing everyone to look a little deeper than they had before. 2 days later, the town hall buzzed with a rare kind of energy. Folding chairs lined the old wooden floors, filled with curious townspeople, teenagers, veterans, churchgoers, shopkeepers, all gathered because they'd heard whispers of a man who wasn't supposed to exist in small places like Willow Creek. The mayor had invited Samuel to speak at a community event originally meant for local leaders and youth mentors. But this time, everyone showed up. Word had spread. The man Officer Malone had disrespected was no ordinary visitor. He was the Ghost. Samuel stood at the front with quiet poise, dressed in a dark suit that somehow made him look even more commanding, medals pinned neatly to his chest. When he spoke, it wasn't loud, but the room fell completely silent. He didn't talk about war to impress anyone. He didn't brag or shout or glorify violence. Instead, he told stories about the men he served with, some who came home, some who didn't. He spoke of honor, of sacrifice, of what it means to carry weight you never get to put down. "I've seen strong men cry," he said, his deep voice steady. "I've seen scared boys step up when nobody else would. Courage isn't how loud you are, it's how steady you stay when everything's falling apart." People listened, really listened. Even the teenagers who normally rolled their eyes at speeches were locked in. Samuel talked about the difference between power and respect, and how true strength never needed to show off. In the back of the room stood Malone, hands folded, heart heavy. Watching Samuel speak, he felt something shift inside him. Shame, yes, but also something deeper. Respect, humility. After the event ended and the crowd began to drift out in quiet conversation, Malone stayed behind, watching as Samuel folded a chair and helped pack up like anyone else. Finally, approached Mr. Collins, he said, voice low. Samuel looked up, waiting. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what I did. I didn't know who you were." Samuel studied him for a long moment before replying. "That's not the point," he said calmly. "Doesn't matter who I am. You don't need to know someone's history to treat them with decency." Malone nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I know you're right. I messed up, and I want to do better." Samuel gave a slow nod, then extended a hand. Malone shook it, surprised by the firm, steady grip. "You don't need to impress me," Samuel said. "You need to grow. That starts with listening." With that, he picked up the last folding chair and walked toward the exit, the light of the setting sun casting his shadow across the old wooden floor. Malone watched him go, knowing deep down that this moment was going to stick with him for the rest of his life. The man he had once mocked had become the quiet voice in his head, reminding him to be better, and for the first time since putting on that badge, he understood what service truly meant. The morning Samuel left Willow Creek, the town seemed strangely still. The black sedan pulled away from Maggie's diner without ceremony, without farewells or fanfare, just like how he came quiet, unnoticed at first, but leaving behind a presence no one could forget. Maggie watched from the window as the car disappeared down the road, her hand still resting on the coffee pot she had meant to bring to his table. He hadn't said goodbye. He didn't need to. The town felt his absence the moment he was gone. Over the next few weeks, things changed subtly but surely. Officer Malone was the first to shift. No more swaggering patrols or sideways looks at people who didn't fit in. He started spending time at the local youth center, listening, more than talking, asking real questions about how to serve the people instead of control them. People noticed. Not everyone knew why he'd changed, but those who were at the town hall remembered Samuel's words and the quiet dignity he carried. The mayor, too, spoke often about service after Samuel's visit, what it meant to truly lead, to do the hard work quietly, with purpose and humility. Kids in town began to look up stories of the Delta Force, learning about heroes they'd never been taught in school. They found old articles with Samuel's name barely mentioned, just a ghost in the footnotes of history, that made them admire him even more. He wasn't chasing praise. He lived like a shadow, steady, purposeful, unseen but necessary. Months passed, and one day a plaque appeared outside Maggie's diner. It wasn't flashy, just a polished piece of bronze with simple words, "In honor of Samuel Ghost Collins, a man who reminded us that strength is quiet and respect is earned." No one needed to be told who had paid for it. The whole town knew. Back in his own world, wherever that was, somewhere east, maybe by the ocean, maybe deep in the hills, Samuel likely had no idea what his short visit had stirred. He didn't seek validation. His legacy wasn't in headlines or medals, it was in the way he moved through the world and left people changed. That was the power of the ghost. And in Willow Creek, he had left behind something more valuable than fear or authority. He had awakened conscience. Officer Malone, now a very different kind of man, stood often in front of that plaque during his morning walks. He'd touch the edge of it and whisper a quiet thanks, not just for forgiveness, but for the lesson. Because in a world full of noise, Samuel Collins had taught him and everyone in Willow Creek that true greatness doesn't demand attention. It walks through a place, says little, and leaves it better than it was. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it leaves behind a shadow that becomes a light. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to The Black Struggle for more powerful stories that deserve to be heard.